The promise was made on a morning that looked like any other, with pale light stretching over open land and the sound of cattle shifting in the distance. It did not feel important at the time. It was spoken quietly, almost offhand, the kind of promise people make because it feels right in the moment, not because they expect it to change their lives. Yet even as the words left the rancher's mouth, something settled deep in his chest, heavy and certain, as if the land itself had heard and remembered. He was a man known more for his work than his words. Neighbors said he could read the weather by the way dust lifted from the road and knew every inch of his ranch the way others knew their own hands. His days followed a steady rhythm shaped by sun and soil, responsibility and routine. There was comfort in that rhythm, and also loneliness, though he rarely admitted it even to himself. The wide land gave him space, but it also echoed when night came and the house fell quiet. The promise came because someone needed it. A woman arrived at his ranch just after dawn, her clothes travel-worn, her posture stiff with exhaustion and pride. She did not ask for help right away. She stood at the fence, one hand resting on the post, looking out as if measuring the land and the man who owned it. There was something guarded in her eyes, something that suggested she had learned to rely on herself long before this moment. When she finally spoke, her voice was calm but strained. She carried news that tied her to the ranch in a way neither of them had expected. It had to do with a past obligation, one left unfinished, one the rancher had inherited without knowing its weight. The land had a history, like all things, and sometimes that history showed up unannounced. The rancher listened, hat in his hands, eyes narrowed not in suspicion but in thought. He did not interrupt. He did not rush. When she finished, silence stretched between them, filled only by the sound of wind moving through dry grass. He understood then that whatever he chose to say would matter. It would shape more than just the day. He gave his word. It was simple and clear. He said he would see the matter through, that he would not turn away from what was owed. The woman studied him closely, as if searching for cracks in his certainty. Finding none, she nodded once. Relief flickered across her face, gone almost as quickly as it appeared. Neither of them spoke of what the promise might demand. Neither of them spoke of how long she might stay, or what it would mean to share space and time. Some things are easier left unsaid, at least at first. She stayed because she had nowhere else to go that felt right. He did not ask questions about her past beyond what was necessary. He gave her a room, work if she wanted it, and distance when she needed it. She accepted all three with quiet grace. Slowly the ranch adjusted to her presence. An extra cup set out at breakfast, second shadow crossing the yard in the late afternoon sun. Days passed, then weeks. The promise lingered between them, unspoken but alive. It shaped their interactions in subtle ways. The rancher found himself watching her more than he meant to, noticing how she moved with purpose, how she seemed most at ease when her hands were busy. She, in turn, observed his steady patience, the way he spoke more to animals than to people, the kindness that surfaced in actions rather than words. There were moments when tension brushed close, when a look lasted a second too long or a shared silence grew heavy with meaning. Both of them pulled back when that happened, unsure of the ground they were standing on. The promise was a boundary as much as it was a bond. It tied them together, but it also warned them to be careful. The land itself seemed to watch, unchanged and patient. Storms rolled through, testing fences and resolve alike. The woman proved herself capable, standing firm against wind and rain, refusing to be sent inside when work needed doing. The rancher respected that, even as worry tugged at him in ways he did not fully understand. At night, when the house settled and the world grew quiet, each of them lay awake with their own thoughts. The rancher wondered how a single promise had shifted his carefully balanced life. The woman wondered whether trusting him had been a risk or a turning point. Neither found easy answers. Whispers began to drift in from beyond the ranch. People noticed her presence, asked questions framed as casual curiosity. The rancher brushed them off, but he felt the pressure building. Promises were rarely made in isolation. They had consequences, expectations, eyes watching to see how they would be kept. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky in muted colors, the woman finally spoke of her fear. She said promises had failed her before. She said she did not know what would happen if this one broke. Her voice was steady, but her hands betrayed her, fingers twisting together as if bracing for impact. The rancher listened, the weight of his words settling heavier than ever. He realized then that the promise was no longer just about land or duty. It had become personal. It had become a matter of trust, of hearts held carefully and not yet named. He told her he did not make promises lightly. He told her he understood the cost of breaking one. His words were plain, but they carried truth shaped by years of living with the consequences of choices made and unmade. She looked at him for a long moment, something softening in her expression. For the first time, she smiled without reservation. It was small, but it stayed with him long after she turned away. Still, uncertainty hung in the air. The promise had yet to be tested, and both of them knew that when it was, it would demand more than either had planned to give. Outside forces were already moving, drawn by the unresolved past that had led her to his gate. As night settled over the ranch, the land lay quiet beneath the stars. Inside the house, two lives continued to circle one another, bound by a promise whose true cost had not yet been paid. Somewhere between duty and desire, between caution and hope, something was beginning to take shape. Neither of them could see it clearly yet. They only knew that when the moment came to honor the promise fully, nothing would remain the same. Morning came slow and pale, as if the land itself was unsure how much light to give. The rancher was already awake, moving through his routine with practiced ease. He fixed a loose hinge on the barn door, checked the water troughs, and scanned the horizon the way he always did. Yet his thoughts kept drifting back to the promise, turning it over in his mind like a stone that did not quite fit in his pocket. The woman joined him later, sleeves rolled up, hair tied back against the wind. She did not speak at first, only picked up a task and worked alongside him. There was comfort in that quiet cooperation. It felt earned, not forced. Still beneath the calm surface, questions pressed in on both sides. The promise tied to the land was older than either of them wanted to admit. It reached back to an agreement made years ago, when the rancher's family had taken on more responsibility than they realized. The details were vague, clouded by time and half-remembered conversations, but the weight of it was clear. Something had been delayed too long, and now it was demanding attention. The woman carried pieces of that history with her. At night, when the house settled, memories crept in and kept her awake. She remembered voices raised in arguments she had not understood as a younger woman. Papers folded and unfolded until the creases wore thin. She remembered being told that one day things would be made right. That day had taken its time. She did not share all of this with the rancher, not yet. Some truths felt too sharp to lay out in full daylight. Instead, she spoke in careful fragments. It's enough to explain why the promise mattered so deeply to her, but not enough to reveal how much she feared its outcome. The rancher, for his part, began to dig into his own past. He searched old records, yellowed notes tucked away in drawers, anything that might shed light on what had been agreed to and why. Each discovery brought more questions than answers. Names he barely recognized. Terms written in careful handwriting that suggested urgency and trust. As the days passed, a sense of being watched settled over the ranch. It was not constant, but it was enough to unset meaning into ordinary moments. A rider passing on the distant road slowed longer than necessary. A neighbor asked pointed questions about the woman's stay, framed as concern but edged with curiosity. The rancher brushed it off outwardly, but inside, his resolve hardened. He had given his word. Whatever came of it, he would see it through. The woman noticed the change in him. His shoulders seemed set more firmly, his gaze sharper when he looked beyond the fences. It reassured her and frightened her in equal measure. Promises kept could still carry a cost. They spoke more as the workdays grew longer. Not about the promise directly, but about smaller things, where she had learned to handle livestock. Why he preferred the far pasture, even though it took longer to reach. These conversations built a quiet bridge between them, one careful step at a time. There were moments when laughter slipped in, unexpected and brief, easing the tension before it returned. Each time they both seemed surprised by it, as if joy had arrived uninvited. One afternoon a letter arrived. The rancher found it tucked into the mailbox at the end of the long dirt drive. The envelope was plain, the writing unfamiliar. He did not open it right away. He stood there for a moment, the wind tugging at his coat, feeling the weight of what it might contain. When he did read it, his jaw tightened. The letter was formal, firm. It referenced the old agreement, stated that time had run out, and demanded action. There was no threat spelled out, but it did not need one. The message was clear enough. He folded the letter carefully and slipped it into his pocket. He did not mention it to the woman that night. Instead, he watched her across the dinner table, noting how the lamplight caught her expression, how she seemed both strong and weary. He told himself he would share the news soon, when he had sorted his thoughts. She sensed the shift anyway. Trust made her perceptive. She asked if something was wrong. He said only that matters were moving faster than he had expected. It was not a lie, but it was not the whole truth. The land responded to the tension in its own way. A fence post snapped under pressure from restless cattle. A sudden storm rolled through, fierce and brief, leaving behind broken branches and a charged silence. Both of them worked side by side to set things right, hands muddy, tempers carefully held in check. As they worked, the woman spoke of leaving once the promise was fulfilled. She said it calmly, as if stating a simple plan. The rancher nodded, but the words struck him harder than he expected. The idea of the ranch returning to its former quiet felt wrong now, like something essential would be missing. He did not tell her that. He did not tell her how her presence had altered his days, how the promise had grown into something larger than duty. He was still a man cautious with his heart, shaped by years of solitude. That night, he finally showed her the letter. She read it slowly, her face pale but composed. When she finished, she folded it and placed it on the table between them. The promise had taken on a sharper edge. It was no longer a matter of choice, but of timing. She asked what he planned to do. He said he would meet it head-on, that running had never been his way. His voice was steady, but his eyes searched hers, as if asking a question he did not dare speak. She reached across the table, her hand resting lightly over his. The touch was brief, but it carried weight. She said she trusted him. The words settled between them, binding and fragile all at once. Outside, the wind rose again, moving through the grass like a whisper of warning. Whatever lay ahead would test more than land and agreements. It would test the promise, the trust growing between them, and the quiet hope neither had yet named. As the lamp burned low and shadows stretched across the room, both of them understood that the past was closing in. The promise would soon demand its full measure, and when it did, it would reveal whether it was meant to be kept with sacrifice or transformed into something neither had expected. The days that followed carried a different weight, as if the air itself had thickened with expectation. The rancher rose earlier than usual, pushing himself into work before thought could catch up. He repaired fences that did not truly need fixing, and walked the far edges of the land more often, studying boundary lines that had once felt settled. Now, every marker seemed uncertain, every stretch of soil tied to a question that refused to rest. The woman noticed the change in rhythm. She matched it with her own quiet resolve, taking on heavier tasks without being asked. She mended tack, organized supplies, and kept the house running smoothly. On the surface, nothing appeared amiss. Beneath it, worry threaded through her every movement. The letter had confirmed what she already feared. The past was no longer content to stay buried. At times, she wondered if she had been selfish to come here at all. She replayed the moment she stood at the fence that first morning, weighing her need against the unknown cost to him. The rancher had not hesitated then, but now she saw the strain settling into his shoulders. Promises could be generous things, but they could also demand more than either party expected. News traveled slowly, yet it traveled. Neighbors stopped by under the excuse of returning a borrowed tool. He lingered longer than necessary, eyes scanning the yard, the house, the woman working near the barn. His questions were polite but probing.
How long
would she be staying? What business had brought her here? The rancher answered evenly, offering nothing more than courtesy required. When the neighbor finally left, the quiet felt uneasy rather than peaceful. Later that evening, the woman admitted she had noticed the looks, the questions. She said she did not want to bring trouble down on him. He replied that trouble rarely asked permission, and that turning away now would solve nothing. Still, her concern deepened. She had spent too much of her life being the source of other people's burdens, even when it was never her intention. Another letter arrived 2 days later, this one hand-delivered by a man who did not bother to hide his interest. He stayed mounted, posture stiff, gaze sharp. He spoke formally, as if reciting from memory. Deadlines were mentioned, consequences hinted at. The rancher listened without comment, then said he would respond in due time. The man tipped his hat, a gesture empty of respect, and rode off. The woman watched from the porch, arms folded tightly. The sight stirred old memories of authority delivered without compassion, of choices narrowed by power held elsewhere. That night she dreamed of doors closing one after another until she stood alone in the dark. The rancher began to consider options he had long avoided, selling off a portion of land, challenging the agreement outright, seeking help from people he had not spoken to in years. None of the choices sat easily with him. Each carried its own risk, its own potential loss. The promise pressed in on every side, reshaping the meaning of the ranch itself. What had once been a refuge now felt like a crossroads. He realized that keeping his word might require surrendering the very stability he had worked so hard to build. Meanwhile, the woman wrestled with her own conflict. She had come seeking fairness, closure, perhaps justice. She had not come seeking affection or connection or the quiet warmth that now threaded its way into her days. She found herself watching the rancher when he was not aware, noting the care he took with animals, the patience he showed even when frustration flickered. Feelings she had sworn off long ago stirred, unwelcome and undeniable. She questioned whether she deserved such feelings, whether they were a betrayal of the very reason she was here. Love, she had learned, complicated everything. It blurred lines that needed to stay clear. One afternoon, a sudden storm swept in without warning. The sky darkened, wind rising fast. They rushed to secure what they could, working in tense coordination. A section of fencing gave way, cattle scattering toward the low ground. The rancher ran hard, calling out the woman close behind. Mud clung to boots, rain stung exposed skin. They managed to turn the herd back, soaked and breathless by the time the storm passed. Standing there in the aftermath, rain dripping from hair and sleeves, they shared a look charged with more than exhaustion, relief mingled with something deeper. In that moment, they were not bound by promises or letters. They were simply two people who had faced danger together and come through. The closeness lingered even as they turned back toward the house. Neither spoke of it, but both felt the shift. It made the uncertainty ahead sharper, because now there was more at stake. That evening, the woman spoke of a choice she had not yet voiced. She said that if the cost of keeping the promise proved too high, she would leave. She would find another way to settle what remained unresolved. Her voice was steady, but her eyes searched his face for a reaction. The rancher felt a tightness in his chest. The thought of her leaving unsettled him more than he expected. Yet he understood the fairness in her offer. He said nothing at first, weighing his response carefully. Finally, he told her that promises lost their meaning if they were kept out of fear. He said he needed time to decide the right path, not just the easiest one. As night fell, each retreated into private thought. The rancher stared at the ceiling, considering the kind of man he wanted to be when this was over. The woman lay awake, listening to the sounds of the house, wondering if hope was a luxury she could no longer afford. Elsewhere, plans were forming. Those who stood to gain from the old agreement grew impatient. They spoke among themselves, measuring profit against patience. The ranch, once a quiet place on the edge of notice, had become a point of interest. Pressure mounted, unseen but relentless. Morning brought no answers, only the steady march of time. The rancher saddled a horse and rode out alone, needing space to think. The land stretched wide around him, familiar yet changed. Every hill and fence line carried memory now, layered with new meaning. Back at the house, the woman watched him ride away, a sense of foreboding settling in her chest. She busied herself with tasks, but her thoughts followed him across the fields. She wondered what decision he would reach, and whether it would include her. By the time he returned, dusk had painted the sky in muted tones. His face was unreadable, his movements deliberate. She sensed that something had shifted, though he had not yet spoken. The promise stood between them, heavy with consequence. It had drawn them together, tested their resolve, and awakened feelings neither had planned for. Yet it had not revealed its final cost. As they sat down to dinner in the gathering dark, the future loomed uncertain. Choices would soon need to be made, lines drawn, sacrifices weighed. Whatever came next would alter their lives in ways neither could fully predict. The tension remained, coiled and waiting, as the promise continued its quiet demand, refusing to be ignored any longer. Continue from the previous section and write 1,200 words leading up to the climax of the story. This part should build maximum suspense and tension, with the audience anticipating how the conflicts will resolve. Don't reveal the resolution yet. Instead, build up to the most intense moments. Keep the story engaging and maintain the use of keywords. Also, do not make any headings. Only write story in paragraphs. Also, keep the wording simple and natural tone. Also, make the script human-centric, and don't give feel of AI-generated. Also, don't create violated content which can affect YouTube policy. AI sees the ellipsis as 3 dots. So it reads it as ... That's why do not use 3 or 2 dots collectively. The next morning arrived wrapped in a strange stillness, the kind that settles in before a storm even when the sky is clear. The rancher moved through the house quietly, his thoughts heavy, his decisions not yet spoken. The woman watched him from the doorway as he poured coffee, noticing how his hands paused longer than usual around the cup, as if grounding himself before the day truly began. Outside, the land looked unchanged, stretching wide and calm, but both of them felt the pressure building beneath that calm surface. The deadline mentioned in the letters was drawing closer. Every hour that passed felt like borrowed time. The rancher finally spoke, saying he needed to ride out again, to speak with someone who might know more about the old agreement. His voice was even, but his eyes betrayed the weight he carried. The woman nodded, though worry tightened her chest. I asked when he would be back. He answered honestly that he was not sure. As he rode away, dust lifting behind him, she stood on the porch until he disappeared beyond the far rise. Only then did she turn back inside, her mind racing. She told herself to stay busy, to focus on what she could control. Yet the silence of the house pressed in harder than before. By midday, visitors arrived. 2 men this time, unfamiliar and unwelcome. They dismounted near the fence, their posture confident, their eyes sharp. They did not ask permission before approaching the house. The woman stepped outside to meet them, her spine straight, her expression guarded. They spoke politely at first, introducing themselves as representatives of interests tied to the land. Their words were smooth, practiced. They said they were there to ensure matters moved forward without delay. When she asked what that meant, their smiles thinned. They reminded her that agreements existed for a reason and that patience was wearing thin. She told them the rancher was not home and that any discussions would have to wait. One of the men glanced past her toward the house, as if measuring what could be taken. The other warned that waiting was no longer an option for everyone involved. After they left, their presence lingered like a stain. The woman closed the door and leaned against it, heart pounding, realized then how far things had escalated. This was no longer a distant legal matter. It was personal, immediate, and dangerous in quieter ways. When the rancher returned late that afternoon, she told him everything. His jaw tightened as he listened, anger flashing beneath his calm exterior. Ice-teared, he blamed himself for leaving her alone to face that pressure. Dord. She told him she was not afraid, but the truth sat somewhere between courage and concern. He admitted that his ride had brought few answers and more warnings. The agreement, it seemed, had been passed through too many hands, twisted by interests that cared little for fairness. Fighting it outright would take time they might not have. Complying fully could cost him the ranch. The weight of that possibility hung between them. The ranch was not just land. It was his life's work, his identity, the place where he had poured years of effort and sacrifice. Losing it would mean starting over with little more than memories. That night, sleep came in fragments. The woman dreamed of standing at a crossroads, paths stretching out in every direction, none clearly marked. The rancher lay awake listening to the creaks of the house, thinking of what it would mean to let go. In the days that followed, tension tightened its grip. More messages arrived, more subtle threats wrapped in formal language. Neighbors grew distant, sensing trouble they did not want to share. The rancher noticed riders passing more often, watching, counting. The woman felt caught between guilt and resolve. She had come seeking justice for a wrong long ignored, but now she questioned whether the cost was too high. She considered leaving again, slipping away before the situation worsened. Yet every time she thought of walking out that gate, something held her back. Their conversations grew more intense, stripped of small talk. They spoke openly now about fear, about responsibility, about the promise that had tied them together. In these moments, honesty drew them closer, even as circumstances threatened to tear them apart. One evening, as the sun sank low and the air cooled, the rancher finally voiced the thought he had been holding back. He said that if it came down to it, he would keep the promise, even if it meant losing the land. His voice was steady, but his eyes searched her face as if bracing for her reaction. She felt a rush of conflicting emotions. Gratitude, sorrow, and something dangerously close to love surged through her. She told him she never wanted to be the reason he lost everything. He replied that some things were worth more than land, though he did not name them. The unspoken truth settled heavily between them. The following morning brought a final notice. It was delivered in person again, this time with clear instructions and a firm timeline. The rancher read it once, then folded it carefully. The woman watched his face, trying to read the decision forming there. He said there would be a meeting soon, one that would decide the future of the ranch and the promise both of them had come to carry. He did not say what he planned to do, only said that whatever happened, he wanted her there. As the day of the meeting approached, the land seemed to hold its breath. Work continued, but every task felt secondary. Storm clouds gathered on the horizon one afternoon, dark and heavy, mirroring the mood that had settled over the ranch. The night before the meeting, they sat together on the porch, the air thick with anticipation. Crickets chirred in the grass, unaware of the weight pressing on the humans nearby. The woman spoke softly, saying that no matter what happened, she would never forget what he had done for her. He answered just as quietly, saying that the promise had given his life a direction he did not know he was missing. They sat in silence after that, close but not touching, each lost in thought. The future loomed, uncertain, balanced on choices yet to be made. Far off, thunder rolled, distant but growing nearer. The rancher stood, looking out into the dark. He knew that by the next sunset everything could change. The promise would be tested fully, and there would be no turning back. The woman rose beside him, her heart pounding, her resolve firm. Whatever the outcome, she would face it with him. As the first drops of rain began to fall, the night closed in around the ranch, carrying them both toward a moment that would decide whether the promise remained a burden, or became the beginning of something neither had dared to name yet. Morning broke under a low gray sky, the kind that pressed down on the land and made every sound feel louder. The rancher rose before dawn, dressed in silence, and stepped outside while the world was still holding its breath. Dew clung to the grass, and the air carried the smell of rain that had not yet fallen. He stood for a long moment, looking out over the ranch, committing every familiar line to memory without meaning to. Inside, the woman woke to the sound of the door closing softly. She sat up, listening, her heart already beating too fast. Today felt different. Not worse exactly, but sharper, as if all the waiting had narrowed into a single point. She dressed quickly and joined him outside, wrapping her coat tighter as the wind picked up. They did not speak much as they prepared. Words felt fragile, easily broken. The horses sensed the tension, shifting restlessly. When the rancher finally mounted, he looked down at her and said they should ride together. The meeting place was several miles out, near a crossroads that had seen more than its share of hard decisions over the years. The ride was quiet, broken only by the rhythm of hooves and the creak of leather. The land stretched wide on either side, open and exposed. The woman thought about how many times she had imagined this moment ending differently. She had pictured closure, relief, perhaps even gratitude. She had not imagined how much she would fear what might be lost along the way. As they neared the crossroads, they saw others waiting. A small group stood near a weathered building, their coats dark against the pale ground. Horses were tied nearby, heads lowered. The sight tightened the rancher's grip on the reins. This was no casual discussion. This was a reckoning. They dismounted and walked forward together. The woman felt the weight of every step, aware of eyes tracking their movement. She kept her chin up, reminding herself why she had come, why the promise mattered. The rancher stayed close, his presence steady and solid at her side. The discussion began formally, voices measured and controlled. Papers were produced, old agreements referenced, dates and obligations laid out with practiced precision. The rancher listened, asking few questions, his expression unreadable. The woman watched the faces across from them, trying to discern where firmness ended and opportunity began. As the details unfolded, the scope of the demand became clear. It was larger than she had expected, more consuming. Land transfers were discussed, timelines enforced. The rancher felt the ground shift beneath him. This was not simply about honoring a promise. It was about surrendering a future he had built piece by piece. One voice suggested compromise, another dismissed it quickly. Tension rippled through the group. The rancher finally spoke, his words calm but firm. He said he would not be rushed into a decision that would affect lives beyond his own. He said promises should be kept with fairness, not force. The response was cold. He was reminded that fairness had been debated years ago, that patience had already been extended. The woman felt anger flare, sharp and protective. She spoke then, her voice steady despite the pounding of her heart. She reminded them that agreements involve people, not just property, and that the cost had already been paid in waiting. Her words drew attention, some of it unwelcome. A man across from her studied her closely, as if reassessing her role. He asked whether she truly understood what she was asking of the rancher. The question cut deep, striking at the guilt she carried. Before she could answer, the rancher stepped in. He said the decision was his to make, and he would not have it questioned through her. The loyalty in his voice sent a shock through her, equal parts comfort and fear. The discussion dragged on, circling the same points without resolution. Time seemed to stretch, the air growing heavier. Clouds gathered overhead, darkening the sky. A distant rumble of thunder rolled across the plains, a low warning. At last an ultimatum was laid out. A final window of time, a clear choice. Comply fully, or face consequences that would be swift and unforgiving. The words landed hard, leaving no room for illusion. The rancher asked for time to consider. A brief pause followed, tension thick enough to touch. The answer came reluctantly. He was granted until sunset. They left the crossroads without further words. The ride back felt longer than before, each mile pressing in on them. The woman's thoughts raced. She considered again the idea of leaving, of removing herself from the equation. Yet the look on the rancher's face told her that the decision went deeper now. This was no longer about her presence alone. Back at the ranch, the sky darkened further. Wind whipped across the fields, bending grass low. They unsaddled the horses and stood for a moment, unsure where to go or what to do next. Inside the house, the quiet was unbearable. The woman finally spoke, saying she would accept whatever choice he made. She said she did not want his life defined by a promise made in good faith, but demanded without mercy. He listened, then shook his head slowly. He said some choices defined a person, whether they wanted them to or not. He said walking away now would haunt him more than any loss. His voice was steady, but his eyes betrayed the cost. They argued then, not loudly, but intensely. She insisted she could find another way, that she would not watch him lose everything. He countered that this was not everything, that some things mattered more. The words hung between them, heavy with meaning, neither fully voiced. Thunder cracked overhead, closer now. Rain began to fall, slow at first, then harder. The sound drummed against the roof, filling the house with restless energy. The storm outside mirrored the one within. As afternoon slid toward evening, the deadline loomed. The rancher stepped outside again, letting the rain soak into his coat. He walked the land one last time, running his hand along fence posts, feeling the rough grain beneath his fingers. Memories surfaced unbidden. Early mornings, hard seasons, quiet victories. The woman watched from the porch, her chest tight. She realized then how deeply she cared, how the promise had drawn them together in ways neither had planned. Love, she thought, often arrived disguised as duty. When the sun dipped low, staining the clouds with deep color, the rancher returned. He looked resolved, but not at peace. He told her it was time to go back to the crossroads. They mounted again, riding through the rain as the light faded. The world narrowed to the path ahead, slick and uncertain. Each hoofbeat echoed like a countdown. As they approached the meeting place, lanterns flickered in the distance. Figures waited, shadows stretched long across the ground. The storm intensified, wind driving rain sideways. The tension reached a breaking point, every nerve alive. They dismounted once more. The rancher took a deep breath, steadying himself. The woman stood close, her heart pounding so hard she was sure others could hear it. Words would soon be spoken that could not be taken back. Choices would be made that would alter lives forever. The promise that had started quietly on an ordinary morning now stood at its full weight, demanding an answer. Thunder rolled directly overhead as they stepped forward into the lantern light, the moment of decision finally upon them, with no turning back.